Reason for 10 seconds. I never imagined that my life would be defined by the intricate web of rivalry, heartbreak, and betrayal that stretched back to childhood, a web spun by my own flesh and blood. Growing up with my older brother, Marcus, was like living in the shadow of an insatiable, charismatic force. From the earliest days, it was clear that he had a magnetic appeal with the opposite sex. Girls flocked to him as if he were a celebrity, and despite my own quiet charms, I was often left wondering why every time I fell for someone, Marcus seemed to swoop in and claim her for himself. I used to joke that he must have a secret hotline to every pretty girl's heart. Back then, I didn't know that his uncanny talent for stealing my girlfriends would eventually lead to consequences I never could have foreseen. I still remember the way my heart would sink each time a new romance I cherished was snatched away by Marcus's charming grin and easy confidence. It wasn't that I resented him in a petty way, I loved him in my own complicated way, but there was an undeniable sting every time I saw him laugh with the girl I'd been courting, as though he were sharing a private joke that excluded me. In high school, I had my heart set on Emily, a girl whose shy smile had once set my pulse racing. I spent weeks gathering the courage to ask her out, only to have Marcus appear one afternoon with an arm around her shoulder, whispering words that made her giggle. I was devastated, my self-worth chipped away with each stolen moment, and I began to wonder if I was destined to be forever the understudy in the theater of love, forced to watch my own relationships be usurped by the one person I both admired and resented. As the years passed, the pattern only grew more infuriating. Every time I opened my heart, it seemed that Marcus was there to pick up the pieces, to offer a flirtatious smile or a reassuring word that only deepened my wounds. I tried to build a life independent of his shadow, focusing on my studies, pursuing my hobbies, and even dating women who didn't have any history with him, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. I learned early on that if there was a woman worth having, Marcus would find a way to claim her first. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more I felt that I was losing not just my love life, but a part of my very identity. Then, as if the universe decided that my long-simmering jealousy and heartbreak were not enough, destiny stepped in with a twist so cruel and ironic that even now, I find it hard to believe. It was around the time Marcus had finally settled down, something I had always thought was inevitable for him, given his irresistible charm, that his own marriage began to show signs of fracture. His wife, Elena, was the picture of grace and warmth, someone who seemed to balance his flamboyant personality with a gentle strength of her own. In many ways, I admired her for that, even as I silently wished that my own romantic struggles might one day end in a similar stability. But the stability in Marcus's life was not meant to last. It started with subtle signs, glances that lingered a moment too long between Marcus and someone else at family gatherings, hushed conversations when Elena was out of earshot, and a noticeable distance that grew between him and his wife. At first, Elena brushed off my questions when I nervously mentioned what I had seen. She would simply smile and say that Marcus was always a private person, that his demeanor sometimes changed after a long day. I wanted to believe her, of course. I had no reason to suspect that the man who had so often taken away the women I loved could be capable of such betrayal. But the more I observed, the more my doubts gnawed at me. I began to notice that Marcus's business trips were becoming more frequent and lasted longer than any legitimate work schedule would demand. He'd return with subtle changes in his appearance, a new cologne that wasn't his usual scent, a slight tan from a destination that was more exotic than his typical corporate meetings, and a mysterious gleam in his eyes that I had never seen before. One evening, when I was visiting our family home for a rare weekend dinner, I saw him whisper something to Elena as she looked away in tears. The scene was fleeting, yet it burned itself into my memory with an intensity that left me shaken. Elena's grief was palpable, and even though I couldn't know the details, I could sense that she was hurting, deeply. Over the following weeks, whispers of discontent swirled around our family like dark clouds gathering on the horizon. Elena, who had once been the steady, unshakable heart of our gatherings, began to retreat into herself. Friends would remark on how she seemed lost in thought, how her laughter had become a brittle echo of what it once was. And then came the day that shattered the last remnant of normalcy. Marcus's wife, Elena, announced that she was leaving him. The news hit me like a freight train. Elena, the gentle soul I had admired, was walking away from the man who had stolen every girlfriend I had ever hoped for. At first, I couldn't understand it. After all, wasn't Marcus the golden child, the one who had always seemed untouchable? How could it be that his own wife was choosing to abandon him? It wasn't long, however, that the true irony of fate revealed itself in a way I never expected. Elena didn't just leave Marcus, she sought refuge with me. In a twist that defied every expectation, she reached out, her eyes filled with tears and her voice trembling as she told me that she couldn't endure the betrayal any longer. She had come to trust me, confide in me about the loneliness, the hurt, and the broken promises that had defined her marriage. I was stunned, my mind swirling with a cocktail of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a part of me that felt vindicated, a quiet, simmering satisfaction that perhaps fate was finally balancing the scales. On the other, there was a deep sadness and a sense of responsibility that weighed heavily on my heart. I had always been the one overlooked, the one whose relationships were stolen, and now, in an unbelievable twist, the woman who had suffered so deeply in Marcus's arms was turning to me. The weeks that followed became a blur of hushed conversations, secret meetings, and the painful, slow process of coming to terms with this new reality. Elena confided in me about the years of isolation, the quiet suffering behind her warm smiles, and the mounting despair that had finally driven her to make a break for freedom. She told me about the subtle ways Marcus had undermined her, the late nights filled with empty promises, and the growing distance that had crept into their once loving home. I listened, heart aching, as she recounted the moments when she had silently cried herself to sleep, wondering if her worth had ever truly been acknowledged by the man she'd married. In her vulnerability, I found a reflection of my own pain, a shared loneliness that had defined my years of watching Marcus effortlessly steal the hearts of every woman I'd ever loved. As Elena's confession unfolded, I felt an overwhelming mixture of emotions. There was the bitterness of years spent feeling overshadowed and rejected, the sting of betrayal that had haunted every romantic misadventure, and now, the bittersweet irony of being chosen by the one woman who had suffered at the hands of the man who had robbed me of every chance at love. My mind raced with questions. Could I ever trust her fully after everything that had transpired? And, more hauntingly, was it possible that in loving her, I might be doomed to repeat the same cycle of heartbreak that had defined so much of my past? That fateful day marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that was fraught with both promise and peril. Elena's decision to seek solace with me was not born out of a desire to hurt Marcus further, but rather out of a desperate need to reclaim a sense of dignity and love that had been systematically stripped away from her. For the first time in my life, I found myself in a position where I was not the one left behind, but the one who was being sought after. It was an inversion of all the pain I had endured, and it left me reeling with confusion and, admittedly, a quiet, hesitant hope. I struggled to reconcile the conflicting narratives of my past. For years, I had blamed Marcus for stealing every girlfriend I had ever pursued, blaming him for the rejection, the heartbreak, the endless cycle of love lost and found. But now, in a surreal twist of fate, it seemed that the universe was offering me a chance at redemption, a chance to prove that I could love and be loved in a way that transcended the bitter rivalry of our youth. I began to see Elena not as a rival to Marcus, but as a kindred spirit, a woman whose wounds were as deep and complex as my own. In the quiet moments that followed our initial encounter, I found myself opening up to the possibility that perhaps I wasn't defined by the shadows of my brother's past misdeeds, that I could forge my own path even in the midst of betrayal. In those early, tentative days of our newfound closeness, we spoke at length about our shared histories, about the ways in which our lives had been upended by forces beyond our control. Elena described the loneliness that had crept into her marriage like a silent thief, the quiet moments of despair that had made her question her own worth. I, in turn, revealed the pain of always feeling like the underdog, the one whose relationships were stolen before they could ever truly blossom. There was a raw, unguarded honesty in our conversations that both terrified and comforted me. It was as if, in sharing our vulnerabilities, we were laying the foundation for something real, a love that was not built on the hollow promises of our past, but on the honest, sometimes painful truths of our present. Of course, the path forward was not without its obstacles. The guilt of betrayal, the scars of lost love, and the ever-present specter of Marcus's influence loomed large in every decision we made. There were moments when I would catch a glimpse of Marcus from across the room, a familiar, knowing smile that made my blood boil and my heart ache. His silent, bitter tears whenever he realized that Elena was no longer by his side were a stark reminder of the cost of a life built on deception. And yet, even as Marcus wept for the life he had lost, I felt a conflicted mix of vindication and sorrow. I knew that his pain was real, that the wounds he had inflicted on others, including me, would never fully heal. But I also understood that clinging to that pain would only chain me to a past that I desperately needed to leave behind. In the midst of this emotional turmoil, I turned to creative pursuits as a way to process my conflicting feelings. I began to write in a way that was raw and unfiltered, pouring my heart out onto paper in long, sprawling narratives that captured every nuance of my inner world. I wrote about the laughter of my youth, the moments of pure joy before the shadow of rivalry had darkened my relationships, and the quiet, unyielding hope that had begun to flicker in the face of unimaginable betrayal. My writing became both a refuge and a form of rebellion, a declaration that I would not let my past define me, that I would forge a future out of the shattered remnants of my heart. As weeks turned into months, I gradually started to see the contours of a new life emerging from the chaos. Elena and I began spending more time together in environments where we could both be honest and unguarded, a quiet cafe here, a long walk in the park there, a shared dinner where the conversation flowed as easily as the wine. In those moments, the pain of the past receded, replaced by a cautious optimism that hinted at the possibility of rebuilding something genuine out of the wreckage of our former lives. I knew that the journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and trust, once shattered, is never fully restored. But for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that love might find a way to bloom again in unexpected places. There were still days when the memories of betrayal would surge up like a tidal wave. A familiar song, a forgotten photograph, or the echo of a whispered secret would send me spiraling back into the depths of despair. In those moments, I would retreat to the solitude of my room, let the tears flow freely, and then, with trembling resolve, return to the work of rebuilding my life piece by piece. I began to see that every scar carried with it a story of pain, yes, but also of resilience and the quiet strength that allowed us to keep moving forward, even when the world seemed intent on dragging us back into darkness. Now, as I sit at my desk under the soft glow of a late afternoon sun, I know that my journey is far from over. The path ahead remains uncertain, tangled with the remnants of old betrayals and the promise of new beginnings. I've come to understand that love is not a static, unchanging force, but a dynamic, ever-evolving part of our lives, one that requires us to confront our deepest fears, to forgive ourselves and others, and to dare to hope again, even when the wounds run deep. Looking back on everything, the years of watching my brother claim every relationship I once thought were mine, the sting of rejection that once felt insurmountable, and the bitter irony of fate that led Elena to choose me over him, I realized that life has a strange way of balancing the scales. In the midst of my darkest despair, I have found a flicker of light, a path toward healing that, while fraught with pain, also holds the promise of renewal. I have learned that the process of rebuilding trust, whether in a marriage or in oneself, is an ongoing act of courage. It is not about erasing the past but about accepting it, learning from it, and forging a future where the scars we bear are not marks of defeat but symbols of our ability to endure and transform. As I prepare to step into the unknown chapters of my life, I hold on to the belief that every ending is also a beginning, that even the most shattering betrayals can lead to the discovery of a strength and resilience we never knew we had. I look forward with cautious optimism, ready to embrace the challenges that lie ahead, and determined to create a life defined not by the ghosts of old rivalries and broken promises, but by the honest, unyielding light of truth and love. The days following that fateful confrontation felt as if I were navigating a maze with no clear exit, each turn revealing more of the bitter truth I had long suspected but never fully accepted. In the wake of Elena's unexpected arrival in my life, and the revelation that had shattered the familiar order, I felt caught between a flood of emotions: anger, betrayal, a deep-seated sorrow, and a strange, almost unthinkable flicker of hope that perhaps I wasn't destined to be the perennial underdog forever. Every morning, I awoke with the memory of that fateful night etched into my mind. I recalled the way Elena's tear-streaked face had looked as she told me how she could no longer bear the weight of Marcus's indifference, the way her voice had trembled when she described years of silent suffering. Those images burned in my thoughts as I went about my daily routine, the steady hum of the world around me contrasting sharply with the turmoil inside. At first, I could hardly bring myself to face the mirror. My reflection seemed to mock me with the haunted eyes of someone whose trust had been so deeply violated. Yet, amid that inner chaos, I discovered a resolute determination to understand, and perhaps even salvage, what was left of our fractured relationships. I began by questioning every memory of my youth with Marcus, re-examining moments that I had once dismissed as the natural dynamics of sibling rivalry. I recalled how, in high school, every time I nurtured the fragile hope of a budding romance, Marcus would effortlessly charm the same girl away with his trademark smile and effortless confidence. Those experiences had sown a seed of deep resentment in me, a feeling of perpetual inadequacy. I'd often wondered whether it was just his way or if there was something more calculated behind his actions. Now, in the light of Elena's heart-wrenching confession, that long-held bitterness clashed with a profound empathy. How could the same brother who had always seemed untouchable, so revered by everyone for his magnetism, allow his own marriage to unravel in such a public, painful way? Late one evening, as a cool autumn rain tapped gently against my window, I sat alone in my study with a battered journal open before me. I had taken to writing compulsively, desperate to give shape to the swirling emotions within me. My pen danced across the paper as I recorded every thought, every fear, and every hope that had emerged from the wreckage. I wrote about the nights when I'd stayed awake until dawn, haunted by dreams of the past, dreams where I was always left behind, always the one whose love was stolen by Marcus's charm. And yet, in those same pages, I also wrote of a strange possibility, that maybe the universe, in its unpredictable cruelty, was offering me a second chance at love, a chance to redefine what loyalty and trust truly meant. I began to notice subtle changes in my own behavior. Where once I had retreated into a shell of anger and isolation, I now found myself reaching out to old friends who had always been a silent support during my lowest moments. Their quiet reassurances and shared stories of heartbreak gave me the strength to start facing the future. I attended gatherings, sometimes alone, sometimes with a group, and slowly began to feel a sense of normalcy returning. It wasn't that the pain had vanished, indeed, it still pulsed behind my eyes whenever I thought of Marcus's smug smile or Elena's tearful admission, but I was learning to live with it, to transform it into something that might fuel a future rather than imprison me in the past. One afternoon, as I sat in a small cafe in the heart of the city, a favorite haunt from years gone by, I found myself reflecting on the nature of relationships and the strange, unpredictable paths they often take. I remembered the first time I met Marcus, the way he had seemed to effortlessly command attention and admiration, and the quiet envy that had simmered within me. I recalled the many times I had lost someone I cared for to his effortless charm, the way every breakup had left a lingering scar on my heart. And then I thought of Elena, whose gentle spirit had finally reached out to me in the midst of her own despair. It was as though fate had conspired to turn the tables. The very qualities in Marcus that had stolen my loves now rendered him helpless, as his wife, the one person he had seemingly taken for granted, was choosing to find solace and perhaps redemption in my arms. That thought haunted me in the days that followed. I couldn't help but feel a conflicted mix of vindication and sorrow. I had spent so many years feeling sidelined, overlooked, and unworthy, only to now be thrust into a position where the very person who had suffered under Marcus's neglect was coming to me for comfort. I wrestled with the irony that the pain he had inflicted on me all those years might, in some twisted way, be balancing out as his own life crumbled. Yet, even as a part of me acknowledged that cosmic justice had been served, I couldn't let go of the lingering questions about my own self-worth. Was I truly capable of offering the kind of love and stability Elena deserved? Or was I simply destined to repeat the same pattern of heartache, forever overshadowed by the brilliance and cruelty of my brother's legacy? In the midst of these thoughts, I began to notice changes in our interactions at family gatherings. Where once Marcus had dominated conversations with his effortless charm, there was now a quiet, almost defeated presence about him. At a recent dinner, I had observed him sitting alone at the far end of the table, his eyes downcast as if he were trying to vanish into the background. Elena, too, seemed transformed. Her once vibrant laughter was replaced by a pained smile, and she often found herself gazing at me with an intensity that spoke of gratitude mingled with sorrow. In those moments, I wondered if the roles had reversed, that perhaps the universe was giving me a chance to be the one who could bring light into her life, even as it cast a long shadow over my own. But the journey toward understanding and acceptance was not linear. There were long, agonizing nights when the old wounds would reopen with a vengeance. A stray comment, an unintended gesture, or even a shared look could send me spiraling back into the darkness of my insecurities. I found that every time I allowed myself to feel the full weight of my pain, I risked being overwhelmed by it. And yet, as I worked through my feelings in therapy and in the quiet solitude of my writing, I began to see that these moments of despair were as much a part of the healing process as the small victories of laughter and hope. In one particularly intense session with my therapist, I confronted the core of my own vulnerability. I've spent my entire life feeling like I'm always second place, I confessed, my voice trembling with raw emotion. Every time I thought I had found love, it was taken from me by someone who always seemed to shine brighter. Now, here I am, with Elena turning to me for support, and I can't help but wonder if I'm really enough for her, or for myself. My therapist's gentle response, urging me to see that every scar was a mark of survival and that the capacity to love deeply came from having endured pain, began to shift my perspective. I started to understand that perhaps my journey was not about proving myself to anyone else, but about embracing the inherent worth that had always been there, even when it felt buried beneath the weight of betrayal. Inspired by this newfound resolve, I took a series of small, deliberate steps toward reclaiming my life. I enrolled in a creative writing workshop, determined to channel my turbulent emotions into something constructive. There, among strangers who shared their own tales of heartache and hope, I discovered that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than a sign of weakness. I began to write short stories that mirrored my own struggles, tales of love, betrayal, and the slow, painstaking journey to forgiveness. Each word on the page was a step toward reclaiming my identity, a reminder that I was more than the sum of my past rejections. At the same time, I found myself drawn to the natural world as a place of healing. On many early mornings, I would lace up my shoes and head to a nearby park, where the simple act of walking among the trees and listening to the soft rustle of leaves brought a sense of peace I had long forgotten. Those walks became moments of quiet introspection, where I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of my emotions, from the searing pain of betrayal to the tentative hope of a future built on honesty and resilience. In the interplay of light and shadow beneath the canopy, I saw reflections of my own inner landscape, a delicate balance between despair and the promise of renewal. One particularly clear day, as I sat by a small pond watching the water ripple with the gentle caress of the breeze, I made a silent promise to myself. I vowed that I would no longer let the wounds of the past dictate the course of my life. Instead, I would strive to build something new, an identity that was defined by strength, authenticity, and the courage to love despite the scars. That day, I resolved to confront the lingering presence of Marcus's betrayal head-on, not to seek revenge, but to finally free myself from the chains of envy and bitterness that had haunted me for so long. I arranged a meeting with Marcus, a conversation that had been both inevitable and, in some twisted way, necessary. When we met in a quiet corner of a familiar cafe, a place that had once been our playground of shared jokes and sibling rivalry, the air was heavy with unspoken tension. Marcus sat across from me, his eyes avoiding mine as if he were afraid that in them I might see the truth of all he had taken from me over the years. The conversation that ensued was raw and unfiltered. I demanded to know why he had always seemed to have a way with the women I loved, why every time I had built a connection, he was there, laughing, charming, stealing the spotlight. He offered little in the way of explanation, just a halting admission that he had always enjoyed the attention, that he never realized the cost it would have on me until it was too late. His remorse was palpable, and for the first time, I saw in his eyes not just a smug confidence, but the pain of a man who had lost his way. That conversation did not erase the hurt, nor did it heal the old wounds completely, but it did mark the beginning of a slow, painful reconciliation with my own emotions. I realized that while Marcus's actions had hurt me deeply, they were also a reflection of his own internal struggles, his need to be admired, his inability to truly commit to any relationship without overshadowing those around him. It was a bitter pill to swallow, yet in that moment of shared vulnerability, I began to see that our pain was interconnected. His tears, which now flowed freely in the aftermath of his wife Elena's departure, were not just for the loss of a relationship but for the realization that he had become a victim of his own insecurities. And even as I felt a twinge of satisfaction at the irony, I also recognized the cost that had been paid in lost opportunities for both of us. In the midst of this turbulent re-evaluation of our family dynamics, Elena's presence in my life grew more significant. Our clandestine conversations, once marked by tentative glances and hushed tones, began to form the foundation of something raw and real. We met privately in quiet cafes, parks, and even during solitary walks along the riverbank. Each encounter was laden with an unspoken understanding of shared pain, a recognition that both of us had been wronged by the man we had once trusted implicitly. Elena's eyes, once clouded with the sorrow of a life betrayed by Marcus, began to shine with a fragile light of hope as she recounted her dreams for a future where she was valued for who she truly was. Her vulnerability resonated deeply with me, stirring within me the realization that perhaps our connection was not born out of rivalry, but out of a shared quest for healing and genuine love. Our conversations were punctuated by moments of silence where the weight of our histories pressed down on us, and in those silences, I began to sense the beginnings of a transformation. I was no longer defined solely by the bitterness of envy or the sting of betrayal. I was starting to see the contours of my own resilience emerging from the ashes of lost dreams. I would leave our meetings with a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet conviction that while the road to healing was long and fraught with setbacks, it was also paved with the possibility of rebuilding trust and forging a new identity from the remnants of our shared heartbreak. Slowly, as the weeks gave way to months, I started to reclaim the parts of myself that had been buried under layers of resentment and despair. I immersed myself in creative pursuits, writing, painting, and even learning to play the guitar, each new endeavor a step toward rediscovering a voice that I had long thought was silenced by the constant echo of rejection. I began to see that while Marcus had once stolen every girlfriend I had ever cherished, there was a strength in my own ability to love and to endure. My writing, once a solitary refuge for my darkest thoughts, transformed into a testament to my journey, a chronicle of pain, hope, and the relentless pursuit of truth in a world that often thrived on deception. There were still days when the memories of the past would surge up unexpectedly, a familiar laugh, a shared glance across a crowded room, and in those moments, I would pause, take a deep breath, and remind myself that I was no longer defined by old wounds. I had learned that forgiveness was not a sudden, miraculous event, but rather a series of small, courageous choices made day by day. I began to forgive not only Marcus for the years of petty theft but also myself for the times I had allowed his charm to cast a long, dark shadow over my own worth. In accepting the imperfections of my past, I found the strength to build a future that was undeniably my own, a future where love, trust, and genuine connection could flourish in the light of truth. Now, as I sit here writing these words in the soft glow of an early summer evening, I feel a quiet certainty emerging from the tumult of my past. The scars of betrayal and lost love remain, etched into my heart like a bittersweet reminder of the battles I have fought and the lessons I have learned. Though the journey is far from over, and there will be moments when the ghosts of jealousy and betrayal return to test my resolve, I have discovered that I am capable of embracing both the pain and the possibility of renewal. I have learned that even when the person who once stole every hope I had for love is forced to confront the consequences of his actions, there is a chance for transformation on both sides. The path ahead remains uncertain. I know that reconciling the fractured bonds with my family, and especially with Marcus, will be a slow, uneven process filled with setbacks and hard truths. And I also know that building a future with Elena, built on honesty and shared vulnerability, will require every ounce of strength I have gathered over these tumultuous months. But as I reflect on the journey so far, I recognize that each step, no matter how painful, has brought me closer to the person I am meant to become, a person who is unafraid to love deeply, to forgive painfully, and to rise from the ruins of betrayal with a heart that is both scarred and resilient. In the soft, lingering light of that summer evening, as I prepare to face another day with a renewed sense of hope, I resolve to keep moving forward. I resolve to honor my past not as a chain that binds me, but as a tapestry that tells the story of my survival, a story that, though marked by heartbreak, is also illuminated by the promise of new beginnings. And with that resolve, I step into tomorrow with a heart that is daring to love again, knowing that every tear shed and every bruise earned is a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit. In the weeks that followed our painful confrontations and soul-searching revelations, I began to see that every story has a turning point, a moment when the weight of the past slowly yields to the promise of a future built on the courage to change. Though the wounds inflicted by years of rivalry and betrayal ran deep, I found that the passage of time, however gradual, was slowly softening the edges of my pain. I had come to realize that healing was not about erasing what had happened, but about transforming that hurt into a foundation upon which I could build a new life. And so, with a heart heavy yet hopeful, I set out to reclaim not only my identity, but also the possibility of forging an authentic future, one where love, trust, and forgiveness might one day flourish once again. Every day, I took a step, sometimes forward, sometimes sideways, and occasionally, a painful step backward. I continued my therapy sessions, where my therapist urged me to explore not only my deep-seated envy and heartbreak over Marcus's years of stolen romances but also the hidden parts of myself that had long been overshadowed by his charisma. The past is like a shadow, he told me in one session, it follows you, but it doesn't have to define the light you create for yourself. I began to internalize that message, striving to reclaim the parts of me that had been diminished by years of feeling second best. I started to see that every relationship, every rejection, every triumph and defeat, was part of the mosaic of my life, a mosaic that, though marked by scars, was uniquely mine. One of the most pivotal moments in this long journey of transformation came unexpectedly. It was a warm afternoon in early summer, and I found myself at a small, crowded park where families and friends gathered to celebrate the season's bright promise. I was sitting on a weathered bench beneath an old oak tree, lost in thought, when I saw him, Marcus. He was standing a few yards away, his posture slumped, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, our eyes met, and I could see the vulnerability behind the bravado he'd worn all his life. The same man who had once been my constant rival, who had so effortlessly stolen every girlfriend I had ever pursued, now appeared diminished, broken by a private sorrow that he could no longer hide. Over the next few days, Marcus's presence became impossible to ignore. At family gatherings, his previously assured laugh was replaced by a soft, almost haunted silence. Rumors had begun to circulate that his wife, who had once been the very symbol of his perfect life, had chosen to leave him, and some even whispered that she had found solace in someone else. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of poetic justice, but that feeling was tempered by a deep, conflicted empathy. For all our differences, I knew that Marcus had his own demons, and that the very traits which had once made him the golden child now contributed to his unraveling. One chilly evening, when the sky was a deep indigo and the first stars timidly appeared, I received an unexpected call from Marcus. His voice, usually so confident and playful, trembled with an emotion I had rarely heard before. "I need to talk," he said simply. I agreed, though a part of me braced for another confrontation, not entirely sure if I was prepared to face the man I had once resented so fiercely. We arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town, a neutral place where we could speak freely without the heavy expectations of our family looming overhead. Sitting across from him in that softly lit room, I saw a version of Marcus that I'd never known, vulnerable, regretful, and, most startling of all, genuinely remorseful. "I know I've hurt you," he began, his voice low and earnest. "For so long, I didn't realize that the way I acted wasn't just playful banter or harmless fun. I see now that every time I swooped in, every time I took someone you cared for, I was feeding a part of me that desperately needed validation, even if it meant stealing your happiness." He paused, his eyes searching mine as if he were asking for forgiveness before he even had a chance to speak further. "I'm sorry," he said simply, and for a long moment, that single word seemed to carry the weight of all the years we'd lost to rivalry and unspoken resentment. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. On one hand, there was a raw, unyielding anger for the years of heartbreak, the moments when I had watched helplessly as my own chances at love were usurped by his effortless charm. On the other, there was an unexpected recognition of our shared human frailty, the understanding that Marcus, too, was a wounded soul struggling under the burden of his own insecurities. "Why didn't you ever see it?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Why did you never realize that in trying to be the best at everything, you were also destroying what could have been your chance at genuine happiness?" Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he admitted that he had been chasing after admiration and fleeting conquests to mask the emptiness inside him. He confessed that he'd always feared that if he showed his true self, vulnerable and imperfect, he would be dismissed, that he wouldn't be loved at all. That conversation marked a turning point for both of us. In that moment, the rivalry that had defined our entire lives seemed to dissolve into something more complicated, a shared understanding of pain and the human need for validation. I realized that for years, I had allowed Marcus's successes and my own failures to dictate my sense of worth. And now, as I sat there listening to him, I began to see that the cycle of envy and resentment could be broken if we both were willing to confront the truth of who we were, not just as siblings, but as flawed human beings capable of growth and change. In the weeks that followed, our paths began to diverge from the bitterness of our shared past. Marcus took steps toward mending his own life, seeking therapy and working to understand the root of his need for constant validation. He reached out to those he had hurt, attempting to make amends where possible. I, too, continued on my own journey of healing, finding solace in creative pursuits and the steady support of close friends who reminded me that my worth was not measured by the shadows of my brother's actions. Then came the day that truly sealed the transformation of our fractured family. At a long-anticipated reunion, our extended family gathered in a sunlit garden to celebrate a milestone birthday. For a few precious hours, the atmosphere was filled with tentative laughter, shared stories, and the fragile hope that the past could be left behind. As I watched Marcus interact with our relatives, his smile now gentle, his eyes holding a quiet sadness but also a glimmer of acceptance, I felt a deep sense of catharsis. It was as if the weight of years of rivalry had finally lifted, replaced by a mutual recognition that we were both more than the sum of our mistakes. In that moment, I also saw Elena, who had once chosen to seek refuge with me, standing nearby. Our eyes met, and without exchanging a word, I felt a profound understanding pass between us, a silent acknowledgement that, despite all that had transpired, we were both committed to building something new from the ruins of our past. Our journey was far from over, and the scars of betrayal would always be a part of us, but in the shared warmth of that reunion, there was also the promise of renewal. Now, as I sit in the quiet solitude of my study, reflecting on everything that has brought me to this point, I feel a mixture of gratitude, sorrow, and cautious optimism. The wounds of betrayal and rivalry still throb occasionally, like old echoes in the depths of my memory. Yet, I have learned that true healing comes not from erasing the past, but from integrating it into a narrative that honors both the pain and the resilience it has forged within us. I have come to understand that every scar is a testament to our capacity to endure, to learn, and to eventually open our hearts again to the possibility of genuine connection. In the end, the story of my life, once defined by the shadow of a brother who stole every love I ever hoped for, has transformed into a narrative of self-discovery and renewal. Marcus's journey toward understanding and mending his own heart has, in a strange twist of fate, become intertwined with my own quest for authenticity and peace. We may never fully escape the memories of what we once were, but I have learned that forgiveness, both of others and of ourselves, is the key to breaking free from the chains of the past. As I look toward the horizon, where each new sunrise promises the chance to rebuild and redefine love on our own terms, I am filled with the quiet certainty that I am no longer a victim of circumstance. I have chosen to rise above the bitterness and to embrace a future where every moment is a step toward reclaiming my dignity and forging a life defined not by betrayal, but by the unwavering strength of the human spirit. With each deliberate, courageous step forward, I celebrate the power of transformation, a power that reminds me that even the darkest chapters of our lives can eventually give way to the brilliance of hope, forgiveness, and new beginnings.